Okay, can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so just really quickly to start this off, I'm Gabriella, and I'm the contract analyst that is helping with this procurement. And I'm going to turn this over to Crystal and Roland. Crystal Yala is a planner here at SANDAG, and Roland is with SCAG, and as this is a joint procurement, they're going to be explaining the ins and outs of this procurement and the expectations, and then at the end we'll go through the contract submissions and any other questions you have. But just so we are not interrupting when they're speaking, if you could put your questions into the chat feature, that would be much appreciated, and we'll get to your questions when there's time. But for now, thank you, and I'm going to turn this over to Crystal.
Thanks, Gabby. So as Gabby mentioned, I'm Crystal Ayala. I'm a partnership strategist here with the Mobility and Innovation Department. I've been working really closely with our partners at SCAG on coordinating our digital equity initiatives and efforts. For those of you who are unfamiliar with SANDAG as an organization, we are the San Diego Region's Metropolitan Planning Organization and Transportation Planning Agency. So we wear a few different hats, but our board of directors consists of representation from all of the 18 cities throughout the county of San Diego and the county of San Diego as well. So we are sort of the forum for regional decision making, transportation planning, and also tackle many other really important regional issues such as housing, broadband, digital equity, and many other initiatives. So I'll let Roland introduce himself next.
Sure, thanks, Crystal. Hello, I'm Roland Oak. I am serving as the project lead for our broadband initiative here at SCAG. Similar to SANDAG, we too are an MPO, or Metropolitan Planning Organization. The SCAG region encompasses 6 counties: Imperial, Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Ventura, in addition to 191 cities covering more than 38,000 square miles. Similar to SCANDAG, we are run by a board. We represent 191 cities and 6 counties, and we too are an MPO, so we have a lot of bread and butter projects. Many of you are familiar with the RTP SES, but similar to SANDAG, we also have a broadband and equity initiative to assist our stakeholders. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Roland. All right, Gabby. So a few housekeeping items on the next slide. As Gabby mentioned, we'll be sharing a little bit about this RFQ, the overview and intent of this RFQ, and then we're going to open it up to a question and answer session towards the end of the presentation. I believe all of you in attending mode should be muted, but for any reason, please try to mute yourself during the duration of the presentation. We're going to be asking you to use the chat to submit questions throughout the presentation, and we'll be posting a copy of this presentation and the attendee list to bidnetdirect.com. That's our vendor portal that we are using to manage and monitor this procurement. And then one other little side note is that we do have live transcript enabled. So if you do need closed captions, you can enable that feature by clicking the live transcript feature button at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. All right, so in the next slide here, we just kind of want to remind you how SANDAG and SCAG as regional agencies got started down this path. Next slide, Gabby, please. For many of us, technology is such an essential part of our daily lives, right? Many of us even take it for granted. We use it every day, but the COVID-19 pandemic really shined a light on those who didn't have access to reliable internet and a suitable device for connecting to the internet. They were literally cut off from access to work, online learning, telehealth opportunities, and just access to online government services. So many of these communities were really impacted by the digital divide and really face a lot of challenges navigating this new pandemic, this new normal, and our reliance on digital services and digital information. But in this next slide here, beyond equity, technology and high quality broadband is also really essential to transportation, to a lot of the work that SANDAG and SCAG as regional agencies spearhead and lead. And all of this is reflected in our long range transportation plans, Connect SoCal for SCAG, and for SANDAG, the 2021 regional plan, which was just adopted last month. Next slide, please. So as transportation planning agencies, SANDAG and SCAG have a really key role to play in helping to expand broadband infrastructure and broadband services in our region. You know, advancing all of this and digital equity really helps to advance our goals of advancing quality of life, economic development, equity in our regions. And our role in this field really started back in 2019 with the issuance of the Executive Order 7320 by Governor Newsom, which directed many state agencies to take specific actions to expand high-speed broadband statewide. In addition to that, it also increased the threshold, that level of service for broadband from 25.3 megabits per second to 120 megabits per second. So really trying to tackle and improve broadband access and services, especially for underserved and unserved communities. There's also been many key state legislations that have passed that sort of help to drive and cement the importance of all of this work. These bills have expanded funding for digital equity programming and broadband infrastructure. And then most notably, the federal government passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act just a few months ago, which is investing over $65 billion in funding for broadband expansion and access. So a lot of resources from both state and federal agencies are being allocated to expand this critically needed infrastructure and help make really important strides to bridge the digital divide and expand broadband access and adoption throughout the state and in the Southern California region. And what we know of how this money will flow is that we anticipate it to be available in a few variety of ways. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, about 70% of those funds will be administered by the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA. And what we've seen from these grant programs in the past is that there's really underpinning theme of partnerships and stakeholder coordination. And so forging these partnerships early on with broadband providers, internet service providers, community-based organizations, cities, broadband consortia is a really critical part of helping to bring these funds into our regions and succeed in deploying many of these broadband projects. Next slide, please, Gabby. So in addition to the state and federal directives and funding that's being allocated to broadband, SANDAG and SCAG took action to better position our regions to bridge the digital divide and secure a lot of this funding for our regions and to expand broadband in Southern California. SANDAG adopted a resolution back in January, a little over a year ago, to develop a digital equity strategy and action plan. We also formed a digital divide task force that was really instrumental in helping us to develop that regional strategy for how we might expand broadband access and adoption. And then SCAG similarly adopted a resolution to assist in bridging the digital divide in underserved communities. So these two resolutions really help forge the path for SANDAG and SCAG in leading a lot of the broadband infrastructure and access projects in Southern California. We've also joined forces with SCAG and a few other notable leaders throughout Southern California to ensure that we have a coordinated and collective approach for digital equity policy and planning as well. And we're part of that group, which is called the Southern California Transformation Group. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the RFQ a little bit, and I mentioned the importance of partnerships and all of this, but before we dive into that, we just kind of want to spend a few minutes talking through what we're tackling, what we're trying to tackle through this RFQ, and what we intend these broadband projects to help us do. So here's a snapshot of the digital divide in the San Diego region. We spent many months collecting and analyzing data to better understand the disparities in our region. And you can see some of the key issues that we uncovered in our research. Many of our rural communities and tribes do not have access to fixed broadband, especially compared to our urban communities. You can see here, 94% of the population in urban areas has access to broadband as compared to only 66% in our rural areas. And then in even parts of the county where access is readily available, adoption is very low, especially among households earning less than $50,000 per year. Also, seniors, Black, Hispanic, and American Indian households are less likely to have a computer and internet at home. And many of our students in our districts lacked connections at the onset of the pandemic, as many of us can attest to or know someone who had to struggle through that. And even those who have internet, as many of you can probably attest to, have reported performance issues, right, that make it hard for them to be able to do their job. So the service that many are getting is simply just not adequate enough for them to participate in work and online learning from home. So this next slide here shows a map of the San Diego region and communities that have access to fixed broadband service. This data is actually based on information that is reported by internet service providers directly to the California Public Utilities Commission. One caveat that I want to mention is that if simply one household in a census block is served by an internet service provider, then that whole entire census block is deemed as quote unquote served. So you can imagine that this leads to quite a bit of over-reporting, but even yet you can really see the disparities that our rural communities and our tribal lands face in accessing broadband services. So next, I'm going to hand it over to Roland to speak briefly on the digital divide in the SCAG region.
Sure. So, when we conducted our own data initiative, we found similar results to SANDAG. So 85% of the population in our urban areas of the region have access to internet compared to 87% of rural regions. We found that 27% of households earning less than 50K don't have broadband subscription. 32% making less than 35K do not have broadband subscription. 22% of seniors either do not have a computer or broadband subscription, and 10% of students under the age 18 do not have a computer or broadband subscription. It's not shown on this slide, but what we're also seeing when we conducted data was in areas, particularly rural areas such as pockets of Imperial County, there are areas that do have broadband subscription, but when you compare to metro areas such as LA, the speeds are much lower compared to what we're seeing in populated urban areas, yet the subscription rate is higher. So again, there are some key issues here. Another thing that we need to mention, and it's not that the data is flawed, that it's just that we're trying to get to a more granular level, is that when we talk about broadband subscription, based on what we've seen, is we're still trying to figure out, is this an infrastructure issue or is this a cost issue? And so, we'll talk about this some more during the RFQ overview itself, but that's one of the things we're trying to figure out as part of this process, so that should we become successful and get internet access to underserved communities, we want to make sure that it's not redundant. We don't want to, the goal is not to build something that's already there. We want to find efficient ways to solve whatever the problem a community is facing. Next slide, please. This is a map of the SCAG region as to fixed broadband services that may be available. Apologies, SCAG region is quite huge, so it's at a very elevated level. But similar to SANDAG, when you look at this map, it looks good at first. You see all the pockets of green, but because it's using census block data, what we're seeing is that, again, if one person or two people have what we call adequate internet, the entire census block is deemed adequate and is marked green. But when we look at it from a more lower level, we know that that's not the case. So I believe, next slide.
we've shared just a little bit of the data that we have available, and much of this was included as resources in the RFQ package itself, but we wanted to let you know that a lot of this information in more detail, greater detail, is available in a variety of ways. For some of the SANDAG data set, a lot of this data is presented in our Regional Digital Equity Strategy and Action Plan, which you can access by visiting sandag.org/digital equity. And then we also have this great interactive story map that allows you to interact with a lot of the maps, the map that I just shared and many other maps on broadband subscriptions and adoptions at the zip code level, where fiber infrastructure is located today, both private and publicly owned. So we encourage you to take a look at that by visiting our Digital Divide data tool. And in addition, we've included a series of additional maps that are sort of show the needs and opportunities for a variety of institutions and organizations. What you're seeing here on the screen is the a map of the educational institutions. Sorry, I can't really see that. Educational institutions within Imperial County that have access to fixed broadband services. So there's a variety of these maps in addition to public facilities, public housing available at the county level for the entire SoCal region. So we have that for San Diego County, Imperial County, and all of the counties within the SCAG jurisdiction. And we certainly encourage you to check that out. That's included as part of attachment A of the RFQ package. Next slide, please, Gabby. All right, so now we're gonna kick it over to, I'm gonna hand it over to Roland to talk about the joint RFQ and some of the important initiatives we'd like to see this RFQ help us accomplish. Roland.
Sure, thanks again. So the first question is, why are MPOs involved in this process? That there's been a lot of questions. We both of us are transportation agencies. So why are we, involved with broadband? Well, the best thing SCAG and SANDAG does is bring stakeholders together, because we represent so many cities, so many counties, and so many stakeholders. It's the perfect venue for us to bring everyone together and hash things out. So one of the goals is what we want to do is to establish a pool of partners that are qualified to enter into a cooperative agreement with SCAG and SANDAG for future funding opportunities. Now, I want to stress that this does not mean that both MPOs will be developing some sort of regional network. That is not the case, especially in SCAG's case, because we do not have implementation authority. We are technology agnostic, and what we want to see is not necessarily a private or public option. What we want to see is whatever works best for community and whatever gets done quickly and efficiently and cost effectively. We want to make this a transparent and open process for identifying partners to collaborate on shovel-ready projects. Once the money is available, and should we get grant funding, we want to hit it hard and hit it quick and bring access to underserved communities. We also want to develop regional consistent approaches. Again, not because we want to create a regional network, but we want everything to be consistent with one another. We're trying to avoid cross-jurisdictional bureaucracy. We want a smooth transition to bring internet to whatever community needs it. We got a lot of questions on who is allowed to apply. Essentially everyone. It's not just ISPs. We want public agencies, nonprofits, affordable housing developers to all apply for this RFQ. Not only do we want them to apply, we want you all to talk to each other. Partnerships is the key here, and we want partnerships across all sectors to apply to either the RFQ itself or in the future RFPs when there is a call for project. Next slide, please. So these are some of the scope of services. Both SCAG and SANDAG are great at helping out with securing funding. Developing grant applications is one of the things we're excellent at doing. So we want our partners to work with us to develop grant applications. Some of the projects we want to focus on and this is as needed. It's not like we want this in every jurisdiction. It could be middle mile deployment, construction of middle mile infrastructure in areas of greatest need. This could be underserved communities, rural communities, areas with high pockets of senior citizens, or tribal communities. In the case of SCAG, where we have more of a last mile issue, we want to see last mile deployment in the underserved communities. What we're shooting for is minimum speeds of 100 Mbps. Right now, the federal threshold, I believe, is at 25/3, but as technology becomes more data-driven, data-heavy, with crazy resolutions coming out there, it's clear that, better speeds are required. We would also like to see affordable options, if possible, maybe supplemental digital literacy documents or adoption measures. Third, we'd like to see some data sharing. We understand that it's proprietary. If needed, we might have to work with stakeholders or partners to go through some sort of NDA agreement. Again, the idea isn't for us to collect the data or to publish it in any way, shape, or form. We need to make that clear. But the reality is someone is going to want to see the work, and we think it's going to be either the state or the feds. It's highly, every time they give out money, there's always a caveat. We'll give you X amount of money, but prove to us that you will be doing what we want to see the money being used on. So that's why they're out there. We understand that there's a lot of, anxiety over data sharing. Our intent is not to publish. It's to help you guys feed the data to the right person so you can secure funding. And finally, if possible, in-kind contributions. There might be some offering in-kind capital funding to the plan, deploying and monitor projects. Next slide. And so these are some of the objectives. What we want to do is to accelerate broadband deployment through effective public-private partnerships to provide cost and time savings. We want to target deployment of middle or last mile broadband investments to areas of greatest needs. We really want to foster collaboration and innovation amongst public agencies, private stakeholders, and community-based organizations. Given what happened with COVID-19, it's clear that we need to break out of our individual silos and work together to solve this problem. We want this to be a data-driven decision-making to target investments. Again, not issuing out the data, but when the time comes, we want to make sure that there are no unnecessary redundant networks being built. It needs to be targeted. And finally, and if possible, we want to find ways to streamline and develop effective broadband implementation practices. Things like permitting may be an issue. Just typical things that slow down the process. We want to help you guys kind of speed it along so that you guys can hit it hard and develop this infrastructure.
And if I could just add, Roland, in light of all of the state and federal funding that we know is truly on the horizon, we're hearing as early as February for some of the notices of funding opportunities from the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. We really want to make sure that we are ready to, and we have all of the partners that are willing to and ready to partner with us identified. And so that's really the intent of this RFQ, is to get all of the partners mobilized and ready so that when funding is available, we're able to identify these shovel-ready projects and really compete successfully and bring some of these projects and funding into the Southern California region. I think this is a unique opportunity for a lot of our partners, specifically maybe our private partners, to sort of transition from the vendor contractor role to a partner role and be part of the process, right? So you're able to work more collaboratively with public agencies, able to participate in the project development process as well, really help us identify where the investments need to be targeted to help meet our objectives and fulfill all of the grant requirements. That's why that data sharing piece is such an important part of this RFQ, right? We need to better understand where investments exist today and what else is needed to fill those gaps, and really ensure that the last mile connections are brought to someone's home, that there is sufficient middle mile infrastructure to provide and expand this infrastructure to areas that are really hard to reach, or rural areas, tribal communities that lack some of that foundational infrastructure. And so we really want this RFQ to help foster a more collaborative partnership space for all of these projects to move forward, and work closely with so many other stakeholders that really have a stake in seeing these broadband projects move forward. Our community-based organization partners that are really tackling the adoption side, the affordability side, digital literacy side of the equation. So really looking for partners that are wanting to engage with us from start to end and really help to see these broadband projects come to fruition and succeed. Next slide, please, Gabby.
So this is a slide that I'm going to go over with everyone. So basically, if you haven't had the chance to yet download the RFQ document, I just wanted to kind of go over an overview of what the expression of interests are going to look like. Just really quickly, in the RFQ document, you can see this on pages 8 and 9. And we just want to really let everyone know that we want a 10-page maximum. In the RFQ, there is in parentheses, 1 page, 5 pages. But we want to make sure that everyone is aware that we really do only want, that many pages, just because we could potentially be getting a lot of these expression of interest, and we do need to review them and make sure that everything is, signed and filled out correctly. So if you could be aware, of that maximum, that's very important to us. So just really quickly, in the RFQ document, you're going to see it laid out in A, B, C, D, E, and F. And these are going to basically outline the documents that and how we want it formatted in your expression of interest back to us. So there's going to be a vendor questionnaire, which is very important. And it's actually on BidNet, it is a separate document that you can download separately, just to showcase, this is a document that we want you to fill out, and it's going to be the cover page of your entire submittal. For the B, it's going to be company history and experience. If you have any questions and you want about what that means, please put it into the chat, and we'll get to that question shortly after this. But in the RFQ document, it outlines in detail what that means and what exactly we'd like to, be included in the expression of interest. C is going to be grant development. So basically, your past experience and success in developing grant applications and for broadband deployment. And again, more detail within the RFQ document. D is the middle mile and last mile broadband deployment. And again, more detail, but please refer to the attachment that we include. That's going to help, answer that question in your expression of interest. E will be data sharing. And that goes into, that's a longer section, and it's split up into, broadband services and broadband infrastructure. And again, that's going to just be a one-pager, more detail within the RFQ document. It could go on for a while about it, but if you have a specific question, please put it in the chat and we'll get back to you. And then the last is going to be the notice regarding California Public Records Act. Again, that's an attachment that needs to be filled out and is included within the RFQ document. Really, so this is the outline that we'd like everyone to, stand by and to complete. And if you do have any questions, please put it into the chat, but it's very straightforward. This is just an expression of interest. This is to be something that is, the beginning of hopefully, future grant opportunities for the San Diego region for SCAG and SANDAG. So please, let me know if you have any questions specifically. Crystal, is there anything that you want to add specifically about any of these sections in more detail?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this in past procurement similar to this. You are welcome to use links or references to, external websites or examples of projects that you participated in if you'd like to augment your expression of interest. This should not be used to replace, answering some of the questions that we've listed in the request for qualifications, but please feel free to use links to augment your EOI submission. Regarding some of the questions in the RFQ, we will have a question period open for a few more days. So if you'd like to review the RFQ in more detail and then submit your questions, please feel free to do so. But I think that's all else I had to add, Gabby.
Perfect. Okay, so quickly, just timeline and next steps. This is phase one, and really the important dates to remember is that the deadline for questions is January 23rd. So please, in that time, review all the RFQ documents, start filling out some of the documents. And if you do have any question, we'll be more than happy to answer, so that before the February 9th deadline, which, is when the expression of interest are due via BidNet, we can answer all of those questions for you. And, phase two and phase three is kind of, what happens after, we receive the expression of interest, once we, hear back if there's any funding opportunities that are released, and, that's when we'll get in touch with everybody using the expression of interest. And if you have any more questions about that, please put that into the chat. We'll get back to you via BidNet, and we have a grant specialist here at SANDAG, and we can, let you know more details about that. But really, phase one is what we're interested in right now, and what is going to be, the opening and the beginning of, allowing us to enter into phase two and phase three. But again, just to reiterate, the deadline for questions is January 23rd. And February 9th is when the expression of interest are due. And those are the two, important things to remember. And then, following the expression of interest deadline, we will, look them all over, and we will execute, agreement partnerships with the prospective partners from the expression of interest that we receive. Crystal, do you have anything more to add about phase two, phase three specifically?
No, just that depending, in the RFQ, we have asked you to identify whether there's a specific region you're interested in working in, whether that be just a company history or capacity to kind of expand. So please identify whether you're interested in partnering or working with SANDAG and or SCAG. This will help us as we kind of categorize and evaluate all of the expressions of interest. And then I'm seeing a question in the chat here in what level of detail SCAG and SANDAG are looking for. We encourage you to please be as specific as possible when we're talking about, for example, middle mile projects. Where exactly are you interested in, participating in middle mile infrastructure expansion? For last mile projects, are there specific end users that you are interested in targeting? Tribal communities, public housing facilities, all of the above. We really want to use these expressions of interest to gather as specific information on projects, so that when grant opportunities are available, we're able to really have shovel-ready projects identified for funding.
There were some other questions. I know there was one by Dr. Jacob as to percentage of 100 Mbps. We don't quite know yet. When we, at least on SCAG side, when we look through the data, so far what we've seen is data that shows at least 25.3. So, we're not quite sure as to what the percentage breakdown is. It could be that, we're quite certain most of it is 25/3, but there are others that are 100, some of them 500, and some of them 1 gigabit per second. So the granular level data is not there yet. As for John Osborne's question on multiple partners following the EOI or just selecting one partner, no, the goal isn't to just have one partner. We want as many partners as we can. That way, when the funding opportunity arises, we would like to do some sort of call for projects. Well, we're still working it out, but we would like to possibly do some call for projects and advertise it or broadcast it to as many partners as possible. And again, we want all the partners to work together. So if you have, let's say I see Mr. Jimmy Chang from Ontario, let's say Verizon would like to work with Mr. Jimmy Chang here. We want you guys to apply together. It's not just we want AT&T to apply. We want just the city of Ontario to apply. We would love to see AT&T Ontario plus maybe an affordable housing developer apply all together for a certain project. That is something that we all hope to achieve. Hope that answered your question on that.
In addition to entering questions over chat, if you'd like to take a little bit more time, you can also enter questions through BidNet. Gabby, I believe the portal is fairly simple. There's a question and answer sort of tab within the procurement information, and you can add a question by clicking that little button that Gabby has highlighted here on the slide.
Yeah, and then you go from this queue. This is what, if you register for BidNet, this is what the platform is going to look like for a vendor. And so you just click here on the Q&A tab, and then you just go up here to ask question, and then we'll receive the question, and then we'll get back to you as soon as we're able to answer it.
We have another question from Dr. Jacob. I could answer that. Does SCAG or SANDAG have a goal for amount of grant money in millions that you aspire to for 2022? our goal is as much as we can. You know, historically, actually, with Southern California, we've never gotten our fair share compared to the Bay Area. We'd like to change that. So yes, the federal and state have caps, right? 65 bill on the Fed side, 6 to 7 bill on the state side, plus, you know, other existing programs, whether it be the coronavirus funds or, you know, funds from, let's say, the CAS, as much as possible. There is no cap. So when it comes out there, we're going to go for it. We're just going to go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would echo Roland's response here. I mean, we are not leaving any rock unturned here. We're interested in identifying any and all possible funding sources that we may be able to leverage and pursue to help expand broadband access and services and adoption in the Southern California region. And so this RFQ will help really mobilize all of the partners that are also willing to and ready to help us secure that funding and see these projects come to life in our region. I see a question from Randall here from Verizon on how SCAG and SANDAG will facilitate for municipalities where and how state federal dollars for broadband will be allocated, parentheses, similar to transportation funding. We're still waiting to see how the federal funding will flow. I believe it's, from what we know today, it's a combination of formula funding as well as discretionary grant programs. But SANDAG and SCAG have done quite a fair share of data and gap analysis. So we have, you know, acquired a lot of data that gives us a really good understanding of where investments are needed. And we want to work with our partners, our municipalities, and any other organizations that are doing that work as well to coordinate our efforts and help to identify and ensure that the funding is targeted in areas that are needed most. So, you know, whether that be our underserved areas in perhaps low-income households within an urban community, or providing greater access to rural communities or tribal households as well. So we've done a fair amount of this data collection and want to work with our municipalities and other partners to ensure that the funding is allocated and targeted where it's needed most.
And then I think that there's a question here from Dave Simpson. If it makes sense, and he goes, it makes sense that SCAG, SANDAG want as much detail as possible, and an NDA will provide much needed protection for some, but for the expression of interest, the NDA won't be in place, right? And I think, Roland, can you answer that question?
We've received this question, I believe, in past procurements as well for other projects. And the answer is, if a proposal wants to, is interested in securing an NDA to submit an expression of interest, that's something we'd be happy to continue talking with you. If you reach out to our contracts analyst, Gabby, she can get that conversation started with some of our contracts folks. The intent there would be, you know, if there is proprietary information in the expression of interest, then that's something that we might want to pursue. But the expressions of interest are simply required, right, to help us identify who the partners are and what the prospective partners and offerings are for each of these partners, what they bring to the table, so that as grants and projects move forward, we're able to select the partners that meet the qualifications best.
Right, that's correct. Yeah, it's likely that the NDA will be required during the actual call for project phase, because that's when, you know, we really need to get down to the specifics, when we, you know, make our case to either the state or, you know, whoever, that this project is worthy. So that's when we see the NDA being the most effective.
We have a question from Martha. As part of this partnership, will SANDAG and SCAG provide any funding to partners to develop projects and grant applications? So the intent of this RFQ is really to help bring all of the partners together to pursue this grant funding together collectively. There is, you know, as I mentioned, a huge theme of partnerships and stakeholder coordination for many and all of these broadband projects. So the intent is for, you know, in 4 programs where SANDAG and SCAG are eligible recipients of funding, right, working with all of the partners, public, private, nonprofit, to ensure that sufficient funding is being provided to advance and implement many of these projects. Roland, anything you want to add from the SCAG perspective?
No, I think you covered that. Seems like we have a lot of questions coming.
Yeah, I think The next question would be from John Osborne. Will you be sending out lists that you want to submit for funding if it's not already in the RFQ? And I think what he means by that is if we're going to be, including where we're going to be submitting the funding to, and that is not included in the RFQ. This is just an expression of interest for, the opportunities that, will reveal themselves, through grant opportunities that could become available. Is that correct, Crystal?
Yeah, in the RFQ, we identified prospective funding sources from what we knew at the time when we were putting this solicitation together, specifically the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act funding, but there may be many more that aren't included in that or future grant programs. So the funding opportunities are sort of endless at this point, depending on what's available and what we are eligible as a regional agency to fund.
Right. So to add to that, and it actually segues to Kevin's question. Again, it's based on parameters. And as to when we think it's going to be allocated, this is interesting in a sense. Typically an RFQ, RFP process, the funding and its mechanism and parameters are set in place, right? That's typically how it goes. And so we kind of know how this is going to work. SCAG and SANDAG have taken this opportunity to kind of, I guess, jump the gun a little bit. We're trying to get prepared, right? There's a lot of confusion going on in both the state and the feds, but we don't want to wait for them. So we're doing this process because when they figure things out and when we have an idea of where the money's going and what it's for, we can hit it hard immediately. Whereas, other people might be, scrambling or waiting on the state or feds. We want to be ready. And this process is meant to be agile. It's again, that's why we're doing the RFQ process. The expression of interest, selection of partners, and then the specificities will come down to the actual RFP/call for projects process. And I think,
Jenny, did you want to add something to that question?
Yeah, I was just going to clarify. So a lot of the funding that we've seen that's come out so far requires, when you apply for it, you have to have a provider already identified. So that's what we're trying to accomplish with this RFQ, is having folks there on a bench. So when funding comes out, we don't have to go through a really heavy procurement process to try and identify a partner. So hopefully that helps clarify like what we're doing. That's why there's not a lot of substantive detail necessarily on funding yet. But the idea is we'll go through this procurement. We are going to award or select multiple EOIs to answer Dave's question. So we want to have a bunch of folks that are out there that we can tap into. And then when a grant comes available, we can send that out to everyone and say, okay, here's a specific grant, here's a specific, potential project or something. Like there'll be a lot more meat so you guys can actually tap into it and respond to it. That's why we think the NDAs will come in later as well, because that's where you're really going to get to the substantive pieces. This is just a broad brush to say who's out there, who's interested in partnering, and we'll continue on that dialogue in the secondary phase of this. So hopefully that helps answer some of those questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. And that's again why the scope of services is broad and include everything from, middle mile development to last mile deployment as well. And then the adoption side of things and data sharing. So we're trying to keep this comprehensive and flexible so that, as Roland said, we are agile enough to adapt based on the grant funding source and the grant requirements that come down the pipeline. So Nick here says, our city is at the early stages of conducting a broadband assessment, won't know how to address broadband gaps for another few months. Will there be other opportunities in the future to work with SCAG on these grants?
Question to that is yes. However, we are determining as to when the deadlines for certain funding sources are. But nevertheless, regardless of what happens, we will work with you to get or try to get some funding for your jurisdiction.
I think what's interesting with this procurement too, and I don't know if we said this up front, is that, while SANDAG and SCAG are both metropolitan planning organizations, we operate a little bit differently. So the process may look a little bit different for SANDAG versus for partners that maybe indicated they only want to serve or work in the SCAG region. And so that's where phase 2 and phase 3 may look a little bit differently for SANDAG and SCAG, but nonetheless, having this pre-qualified list of partners who are ready to partner with us on projects is going to be really important, especially as we kind of wait to see what the funding actually looks like down the line. One other kind of scenario that I just kind of hypothetically want to put out there, as we're talking about identifying prospective partnerships and projects for broadband, all of these are going to require coordination with so many other partners, regardless if they're on our EOI bench at all, right? So if we're talking about deploying a project within certain municipalities' jurisdictions, we need to make sure that that municipality is on board and also willing to partner and engage with us. So there's multiple layers of coordination and partnership that are going to be required for this to truly succeed. And so this EOI is just one first step to make sure that we are, going through a competitive process to identify who those private partners are, who those vendors are, and then we'll continue to engage so many other stakeholders along the way. That's going to be a really key part of the success of this RFQ.
That's correct. And so again, we highly encourage, even though this is still in the early phases, if you guys have any partnerships in mind, please, at this point, feel free to talk to your respective local jurisdictions or other partners to gear up for either, responding to, the RFPs in the future or any other avenue. Again, partnerships is key for this process. We want everyone to work together, regardless of how you go about getting this money.
At the end of phase one, once we have the partners identified and partnership agreements executed, one thing that we'd like to do to, in the name of transparency is to publish this information on both of our respective websites so that as grant opportunities come up, everyone has a really good understanding of who the pre-qualified partners are and how we might engage with them best to really help deliver on some of these broadband projects. From a regional perspective, we've done a fair amount of data collection and analysis for our regions, but many municipalities, like Nick mentioned, are doing their own data collection efforts and might have another lens to bring to the table as well. So we want to make sure we're tapping into everyone's knowledge and expertise, and then using all of our available resources to the best of their ability to really maximize the public investment here.
And then, Crystal, we just had a question come in from Frank. When you identify partners and fund projects, can the piggyback option be used in other parts of the state?
Jenny, if you're available, that might be a question for you.
Yeah, I can take that one. Yes, it should be at least, we tried to make this broad enough for anybody in the San Diego region and the SCAG region. I guess if there's others outside of our two jurisdictions that are interested in it, potentially, depending on funding, because some funding dictates how you do a procurement and it may not fly for them, especially on the feds. But we can talk about that certainly with folks who are interested in it. Let us know.
And I think that answers all the questions we have at the moment, but, please, continue to type if you have another question you'd like to ask. But just really quickly, I would just like to, reiterate that, please, if you are interested in this procurement, or you at least like to download the RFQ documents, please, register and sign up for BidNet. It doesn't cost anything. I have gotten a couple questions, people worried about, the cost of BidNet. BidNet is free. It has options, where you can get access to like a bigger network if you pay money, but to be able to access our procurement and to be able to download the documents that you need to be able to submit your expression of interest, you do not need to pay anything. You just need to register for BidNet. So if you have any questions about that, please, ask. And I'll be happy to answer, but please, we are trying to do everything through BidNet so we can, show that the competitive process, is available to everyone, and you can see, all the questions and all the answers, in one place.
And all of these questions that we've answered today will also be added to the list of questions that will be posted on BidNet. So answers to these questions, in addition to any others that come in, will all be posted and available through BidNet. One more question from Martha Gabby. So as part of the RFQ response, are all partners responding required to provide the SCAG organizational self-assessment form to become contracted partner for future grant project opportunities? Roland, this is a question for you.
I will follow up on that one. Let me talk to my contracts department, Martha, and get back to you on that.
Okay, is there any, couple questions? We still have some time. So if you we just got another question from Sun, the San Joaquin Valley Network with the SJV Regional Broadband Consortium will be replicating this process for the San Joaquin Valley. So ISPs will be able to learn and leverage its efforts in the SANDAG SCAG process. Oh, that's amazing. Any other questions? I know a few people on this call are going to have to leave shortly. So if you do have any questions, and are not able to or can't think of them at the moment, please ask them again on BidNet, and we will answer them as soon as we can.
All right, if there's no other questions, then I think we'll probably adjourn early. Any questions related to the procurement itself, you can contact Gabby directly, or reach out to Roland and I will make sure we put you in contact with the right contracts person to answer your question. But we are very excited by this opportunity, and we hope that you all think that this is a great mechanism and way to bring partners along and really help implement the kinds of projects that we need to see in the Southern California region. So thank you for being here. We'll post this information to our YouTube as well. So please feel free to share this video or the procurement information with any other prospective partners or organizations that you think might be interested in the opportunity. We want to make sure we're getting the word out. And then just a reminder, questions will be due, remind me, Gabby, January 23rd, I believe. And then expressions of interest due February 9th.
Yes, that is correct.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.